Hello. To mark the 60th anniversary of the release of Dev and Vijayanand's now much cherished classic Guide on February 9th, I decided to read the novel by R.K. Narayan titled The Guide, on which it is based. In particular, I wanted to look for a passage which distilled the novel's revolutionary theme, albeit controversial for the time, of a married woman and a dancer to boot, striking up a romantic relationship in order to liberate herself from her stifling domestic life. I found that passage rather quickly. And here is that passage. My troubles would not have started but for Rosie. Why did she call herself Rosie? She did not come from a foreign land. She was just an Indian who should have done well with Devi, Meena, Lalita, or any one of the 1,000 names we have in our country. She chose to call herself Rosie. Don't imagine on hearing her name that she wore a short skirt or cropped her hair. She looked just the orthodox dancer that she was. She wore saris of bright hues and gold lace, had curly hair which she braided and beflowered, wore diamond rings and heavy gold necklace. I told her at the first opportunity what a great dancer she was and how she fostered our cultural traditions, and it pleased her. Thousands of persons must have said the same thing to her, but I happened to be the first in the line. Anyone likes to hear flattering sentiments, and more than others, I suppose, dancers. They like to be told every hour of the day how well they keep their steps. I praised her art whenever I could snatch a moment alone with her and whisper in her ear out of the range of that husband of hers. So, in those few lines, R.K. Narayan manages to quickly take you through the life of Rosie and how she is building up a sort of a romantic relationship. And obviously that lent itself so well to what turned out to be Dev and Vijayanand's Guide. During my nearly 27-year-long acquaintance friendship starting from 1985 right until his death in 2011 with Mr. Devanand, we spoke about many things, and the movie Guide was occasionally in our conversations. Rather than reconstructing from memory how the movie came to be, let me read from Mr. Anand's autobiography, Romancing with Life, where he writes about it. I was in London after the festival was over, for Mona had come back to Bombay to be with our kids. Somebody suggested a book called The Guide. I had not read it but felt curious. So I went to Foyle's, the largest bookstore in London, and asked for the book. They did not have any copy left, but the sales girl at the counter promised me she would procure one for me if I left my address in London with her, which I did. The very next day, the receptionist at the Londonderry Hotel called to say she was sending a parcel up to my room. I opened it to find the Guide waiting to be devoured by me. I read it at one go, sitting on the balcony of my suite, which overlooked Hyde Park. I thought it had a good story, and the character of Raju, the guide, was extraordinary. Then suddenly I remembered the novel had won the Sahitya Akademi Award as the best work of fiction in the English language. R.K. Narayan, the author, was a very distinguished novelist and had also made a name in the Western literary world. After reading the novel, Mr. Anand called the much heralded American novelist Pearl S. Buck, who had won the 1938 Nobel Prize in Literature, with whom he was in contact about the possibilities of turning the Guide into a feature film. She had mentioned it to him that there was an off-Broadway performance of a play based on the novel. Once he met Buck in New York, Anand went to California to visit Hollywood. That is where he decided to call Narayan. This is how he writes about his phone call in his autobiography. The receiver was picked up and I heard a voice say, "R.K. Narayan here." "Devanand," was my reply. "Devanand?" He was curious. "Which Devanand?" "Devanand the actor," I clarified. "Are you sure?" He did not seem to believe me. "Yes, it is me," I assured him. "Nice talking to you, Mr. Devanand," he said warmly. "Where are you calling from, Mr. Devanand?" "I frantically tried to get hold of your number in New York," I said. "You did?" He interrupted me, getting interested when he heard the word frantically. "Couldn't get it from anyone, but I'm now calling from Los Angeles, California," I finished. "I see. Hollywood," I emphasized. "Hollywood?" he said quizzically. "A name associated with the best of show business," I enthused. "Of course, Mr. Devanand." He played with my name and gave a friendly laugh. "Tell me, what can I do for you?" "We could shake hands on a project that can conquer Hollywood," I remarked. He listened silently. "We want to put your story on the screen for the world to look at and admire your work," I said. "What do you mean by we?" He was inquisitive. "Have you heard of Pearl Buck?" I asked. "The famous author? Who hasn't?" "She and I are keen to film your great work of fiction," I flattered him. "Which one?" he asked. "The Guide." "The Guide?" He laughed. There was a triumphant note in his voice. "The Guide," I repeated, "and I want to play the guide." "I like the idea," he said. The movie was to be made both in English and Hindi. Anand writes in his autobiography, "Ted Danielewski and I finalized the details of the partnership between Stretton Productions of New York and Navketan International. Then I flew back to Bombay, where the film industry was agog with the news that R.K. Narayan's famous novel The Guide was to be an Indo-American co-production to be shot simultaneously in Hindi and English, that the world-renowned writer Pearl S. Buck was collaborating on the script, and that Devanand was to star in both the versions. Pearl and Ted arrived in Bombay soon after. I hosted a big reception for them at the Sun and Sun Hotel, in keeping with Pearl's stature. Important people from different walks of life were invited, and they all turned up to meet her. I also held a press conference for Pearl at the Taj. The entire journalist elite of the city attended. Later at Nagpur, I was a special invitee for an All India Congress Committee session and was asked to sit next to Pandit Nehru. I broke the news of my new project to him, and he gave me a pat on the back. Originally, the two versions were to be shot parallelly, with Danielewski directing the English one and Anand's older brother Chetan the Hindi one. But soon enough, as Devanand writes, a clash of creative egos came to the fore. Devanand then decided to finish the shooting of the English version first and then the Hindi one later. That offered a chance to Chetan Anand to leave the project and instead make his much celebrated war classic Hakikat. It was later that Anand roped in his younger brother Vijay Anand. The two decided that the Hindi version would have an entirely different script, keeping in mind Indian ethos and sensibilities. I would suggest you read Anand's biography for some extra details about what transpired behind the scenes during the shoot of the Hindi version, including some consternation at an otherwise suave and urbane Devanand the star playing a disheveled sadhu with a beard towards the end of the film. Guide was a triumph at several levels, including and particularly at the level of its astoundingly inspired music scored by the brilliant Sachin Dev Burman. By many measures, the Guide songs are considered to be among his all-time great songs, as they are for the iconic lyricist Shailendra, as well as the singers Lata Mangeshkar, Mohammad Rafi, Kishore Kumar and Manna Dey. In my estimation, the song Kaanton se Kheech ke Aanchal, Tod ke Bandhan Bandhi Payal, contains what are perhaps the most compelling two lines in Hindi cinema song history, capturing the exaltation and conflict of love. Shailendra rose to the very top of his poetic genius when he wrote, "Aaj phir jeene ki tamanna hai, aaj phir marne ka irada hai." I had asked Mr. Anand about the song and those particular lines. He told me, and I'm quoting him now, Shailendra surpassed himself with those lines as a lyricist. Dada, that is S.D. Burman, surpassed himself as a composer with that composition, and Lata Mangeshkar surpassed herself as a singer with that song, unquote. Every song in the movie was better than the other. In fact, another point I had discussed with Mr. Anand was about Din Dhal Jaye, Hai Raat Na Jaye. And he told me something quite interesting. He said that song would easily be among his most favorite in terms of what he had to do to go inside his interior self to represent the melancholy of that particular song. And he regarded Din Dhal Jaye as one of his all-time favorite songs. And you can see that notwithstanding his sometimes accentuated mannerisms in other films, in that particular song and in the movie generally, Mr. Anand was quite remarkably measured. And to a considerable extent, I think Vijay Anand can be credited for that. Before I sign off, I found that although, of course, he regarded Guide as an absolute landmark of his career, Dev Anand would sometimes get somewhat riled that people almost obsessively talked about Guide while talking about his filmography. But of course, he knew that Guide would always remain sort of an identifier of his career. To mark the 60th anniversary, I suggest you watch the film. It might be interesting. Thank you for spending your 15-20 minutes with me.
कल के अंधेरों से निकल के देखा है आंखें मिलते मिलते, ओ कल के अंधेरों से निकल के देखा है आंखें मिलते मिलते, ओ फूल ही फूल जिंदगी बहार है, तय कर लिया आज फिर जीने की तमन्ना, आज फिर मरने का इरादा, आज फिर जीने की तमन्ना, आज फिर मरने का इरादा।
सवाल अब ये नहीं कि पानी बरसेगा या नहीं, सवाल ये नहीं कि मैं जीऊंगा या मरूंगा, सवाल यह है कि इस दुनिया को बनाने वाला, चलाने वाला कोई है या नहीं। अगर नहीं है तो परवाह नहीं, जिंदगी रहे या मौत आए, एक अंधी दुनिया में अंधे की तरह जीने में कोई मजा नहीं। और अगर है तो देखना यह है कि वो अपने मजबूर बंदों की सुनता है या नहीं।